And the Democratic National Alliance extended sincere condolences to the family, colleagues, friends, and nation on the passing of national hero and former Prime Minister Sir Lester Bryant Byrd, who died yesterday. Like other citizens and residents, we are shocked by the news, as previous reports indicated that he was recuperating well from a recent surgery. All right, and this is actually the opening portion of a statement released by the party of our next guest, who serves as chairperson of the Democratic National Alliance, Malaka Parker. I just want to say good morning, welcome to Observer AM, and I suspect we'll begin our discussion this morning there, the legacy of Sir Lester Byrd. Good morning, Malaka Parker.
Good morning, Darren.
How are you doing?
I'm great. It's been a while since we've connected. It
has been a while. It has been a while, and but it's always a good dance, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Always great linking up with you. Well, yes, as I mentioned, as the introductory portion of this discussion, the passing of former Prime Minister Sir Lester Byrd, of course, somewhat a controversial figure, certainly from a political standpoint. I'm sure there are areas with which you would find a lot of disagreement, but when one passes on, we think about their legacy, usually through a positive lens. What is your reflection on the life of Sir Lester Bryant Byrd?
Well, you are correct, and I will just reiterate that the DNA joins with the nation and, of course, the region in recognizing the legacy of the Honorable Sir Lester Byrd. Now, Lester Byrd would have, what should I say, he would have characterized the greater part of my formidable years, right? And my foray into political discourse. Certainly when he sat as a minister of cabinet and then later became the prime minister of this country. And you are correct, obviously, as is all our politicians, that they leave a very polarizing legacy. But in this moment of reflection, I think that there is a lot that we can credit Sir Lester Bryant Byrd with. He is often revered as the champion of our tourism product, as we know, that a lot of the bold steps that were made during his tenure as the Minister of Tourism and then later as the Prime Minister would have began to shape a modern tourism product in Antigua and Barbuda. I know that also ignited a lot of fire and controversy. Yes. But I think in stating that, he ought to be revered as a man who was bold, who stood his ground. He was indeed a firm leader in many regards. And often he gave way to opposing opinions and pressure. And so it is indeed Prime Minister Lester Byrd that would have authorized, for example, the historic medical benefits inquiry and other such inquiries in the nation. And that would have been a government which yielded to popular opinion, to the NGOs, the civil society organizations in our country. It is the Prime Minister Lester Byrd who would have also authorized, of course, the modernization of our electoral processes. That as well was a very controversial thing. And I saw in that we can see that he was a man that listened to some extent. And I think that that is always a good trait in our leaders.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. Any significant differences in his leadership style, you think, from him and the current occupant of the office he once held?
I felt myself setting that up, while I was saying it.
I'm predictable sometimes, yes.
I would say yes. I think that Prime Minister Gaston Brown has certainly etched himself into the consciousness of Antiguans and Barbudans as a man that is extremely strident. And his personality, his style of leadership is one that is, I think that we often ask for a bit more temperance in his actions and in his utterances. And so in that way, he may not have, he has not yet displayed that he is as considered, probably as thoughtful, I would say perhaps guided as Sir Lester Bryant Byrd would have been. But I suppose that comes with experience and that comes with time. All right. So, and I mean, Lester Byrd had his fair of criticisms as well, where that is concerned. And we know that history always regards us differently, right? And so who knows how history will record the legacy of our dear Prime Minister Gaston Brown.
All right. Well, speaking of said Prime Minister, in a statement that was released last night, of course, he would have given the statement himself on state TV. He indicated that he learnt of the events on Sunday after they occurred. He went on to say that he could not remain away from home, and while on vacation, when the political troublemakers and known criminals are trying to subvert and undermine and destroy our country and the interest of our people by misleading innocent people. The events on Sunday, the Prime Minister characterized, in which the protesters deliberately violated the laws of the land applicable to all citizens and defied the instructions of law enforcement who were seeking to protect the welfare of the population, was politically organized. So he's coming down the line. That is, his chief of staff came down yesterday on this program where he said that this was a politically organized event and this is pure politics. Your response, chairperson of the DNA?
Yeah, I find that to be extremely unfortunate. I listened to the Prime Minister's presentation and that of my friend Max Hurt yesterday with much consternation. I think the Prime Minister once again would have squandered an opportunity to lead with compassion this country. I did not know of whom the Prime Minister was speaking last night. He spoke with, I think, a level of contempt, disgust, and bordering on animus towards the people of this country. Those people, peaceful protesters that were there on Sunday. And I think that the extenuous efforts being made to brand and label this protest as opposition-led, opposition-engineered, that it was an opposition stabilization activity, I find, it leaves a lot to be desired. And all that does is just further destroys the trust and confidence that the people ought to have in the leaders of this country. Because all of us watched on, I believe, over the last month or so, as this grassroots movement gained some traction. We as a party ourselves would have made the conscious decision to stay out of that movement, right? Because we saw it as a level of civil activism that ought to be applauded, quite frankly, whether or not we agree with the various reasons for which people were standing. We accepted that in a budding and mature democracy, that it was their right to do so. And so always in a democracy, you support those types of principles. I think the Prime Minister could have made his point, his disapproval for the way things happened in a different fashion. And he chose not to.
Let me ask you this.
He called the protesters known criminals, political destabilizers, criminals, losers, loafers, charlatans. Why?
Well, you just mentioned that the DNA took the decision, strategic perhaps, of not, being part and parcel of this particular movement, the Antigua Freedom Fighters. But that, many will say, is not the case with the other opposition party, because there are other opposition personalities that were present at the event on Sunday. And the chief of staff in the office of the said Prime Minister made hay of that. He said, look, this is a UPP thing. Look at all the folks on the UPP. Well, he went on to say that is a lot of UPP. I mean, he went on to say something that I don't know if he could prove. But his point was he's tying the opposition to the protesters and trying to make it political. Is that part of the reason why the DNA opted not to be part and parcel of this, to not give the government an opportunity to brand it as being a partisan thing?
Well, we know that the government usually and predictably and quite unfortunately reaches for those types of low-hanging fruit and political tactics, while, of course, asking that politics be removed from this whole COVID-19 issue. So the DNA has not done an audit of how many of our members attended the march, for example. As the leadership of the organization, we took that decision. Now, I can't speak for the United Progressive Party, obviously,
right.
And so I don't know what their deliberations looked like, and whether persons representing their organization at a leadership level went out there as a group or individually and so on. We certainly did not restrict the movement of people, but we discussed this matter, and I think we were very conscientious in the way that we discussed it. And like I said, we were comfortable that the people had this. And we applauded that effort as the type of grassroots movement that we do not often see in our society. And so it was coming from a very emotional, psychological place where the people felt that they had been placed under a lot of psychological pressure and strain, that at this juncture the government was using a very closed shop approach to how they were making policy around COVID-19. And of course, the threat to their livelihood, I think, all culminated on Sunday. And I think that ought to be a grassroots movement. Okay. So you will have to ask the United Progressive Party.
I certainly have every intention to when the opportunity presents itself. But I tell you what, let's pause for a cause. We have some messages to share from our various partners. We'll be back with the chairperson of the Democratic National Alliance right after this.
Turn the keys to your own home with CIBC First Caribbean. We'll give you time to relax when you move in by waiving your first 3 monthly mortgage payments and commitment fees. Get up to 95% financing on your mortgage and a pre-approved Visa Gold or Platinum credit card with 5,000 bonus reward points and more. Visit CIBCFCIB.com/realtors-hub to connect with a realtor to make the home search easier. Finance your new home base with CIBC First Caribbean. Terms and conditions apply. Visit CIBCFCIB.com for details.
Win a Samsung tablet from the Caribbean Lottery. Spend $25 on a lottery game and or top up through a Caribbean Lottery terminal for your chance to enter into this promotion. Weekly consolation prizes of back-to-school vouchers. Promotions available at selected retailers and at the Caribbean Lottery main office and Upper High Street, St. John's.
This is Observer Radio.
Your voice counts. Your questions are answered. This is Observer AM.
It is now 7:31 in Antigua and Barbuda. We are continuing our discussion with the chairperson of the Democratic National Alliance, Malaka Parker. Ms. Parker, as it relates to the Prime Minister's position that this march was illegal. I mean, the police also asserted that in their press conference yesterday. They indicated that permission was denied. This was, in effect, an unlawful action on the part of the protesters. And so the police had a responsibility to maintain law and order. Do the police not have a point, and the Prime Minister have a point that, listen, this was really not legal, it was not sanctioned, and so therefore it should not have been taking place in the first place?
Well, first of all, I think we all saw live video feed from that protest, and I think we all know that it was not a march. That's first. And I think that the force, and I tell you, the DNA is really at great pains to stand in opposition to the royal force of Antigua and Barbuda. We don't do this lightly. Right, and having said that, I think I just want to caution the leadership of our police force to seek to temper their approach to this issue. I think the press conference that was recently had left a lot to be desired, and they may have done great injury to the faith and confidence and trust that the people of this country should have in the police force. Having said that, we do not accept that it was a march. And we also wish to not be distracted and engage in that type of semantics, because up until now, we do not live in a police state. And we have always heralded our democracy. And so even if we accept that the permission was not granted in the particular form that it was requested, I think that we know and we accept that civil disobedience is an acceptable way of progressing issues in a democratic society. So even if we start on the premise that there might be some confusion over the legality of the march. It was an act of civil disobedience. Let us start there. And acts of civil disobedience throughout the world are not treated in this fashion. I mean, I can get very pedantic because I can also ask why the request was not granted. And quite frankly, the freedoms that we have, even though we are under a state of emergency and we are operating with the Public Health Act that has been recently amended, the role, I think, of the police is to assist peaceful protesters in navigating those waters so that they do not break the law, not to create a situation where almost I felt that people were cajoled and almost set up. I mean, I say that because the protesters were allowed to gather for well over an hour. I saw live feeds, Darian, where the crowd was steadily building.
Right. And
only until there were maybe hundreds of people there that this action was taken. I am saying that if the interest was to maintain whatever law and order that language I don't understand. I think that needs to be explained. If there was this interest to do that, then why not do that at the beginning of the march to have that engagement with the people that were gathering and ask them to disperse in another fashion before using that type of brutal force upon a building crowd of families, young, old, and in between.
Okay. The Prime Minister's assertion, which is not entirely incorrect, has to do primarily, at least in part, with the COVID-19 protocols that have existed for quite some time. And that is that no unauthorized gatherings larger than 25 persons are permitted. And in the case of the protest on Sunday, that clearly was not the case. In addition to that, the individuals who are not wearing masks, they were not socially distanced, and there is the concern of a potential spread, a big spreader event as far as COVID-19 is concerned. So that too would have been a factor in the decision to ensure that the protocols were being adhered to. How would you respond to that? How else would the police have enforced that, considering they say that they indicated to the crowd that they need to disperse and they did not disperse?
Mm-hmm. All right, so there are a number of things that you raised there. First of all, I don't know. I don't know that the concern was the COVID protocols, because that is the point that I am making. Okay. I understand that the request was made for the protest almost 2 weeks before the activity.
That is my information as well.
That is the point of engagement, where you are able to direct whoever the organizers are on the safest way to display their action. That is what I am saying. Now, let me make it clear that as a political organization, we believe that any protest activity should comply with the public health directions that are in place at any given time. And we are also asking, why did the police department fail in ensuring that those protocols were indeed put in place to accommodate a people-led protest within a democracy? So while we are in a state of emergency and COVID-19 is real, and none of us want or wish a super spreader, and I think it is for that reason that these early interventions and positive engagements need to happen, right? Because the public health interest and the human rights and other constitutional rights of the population has to be balanced. There is a balance that needs to take place. So it is not that your rights are completely and utterly and unilaterally suppressed because you're in a pandemic. And we can see that throughout the globe and throughout the region, where other peaceful protests are happening. What creates the anomaly in my beloved country? What is driving that? And clearly the answer is the position and the posture of the policymakers. And so it is they that need to come and explain that posture, because it can be done a different way. To give the impression that what happened on Sunday was just a reflexive action to a group of bandits who were disobeying the law, and there was this need to maintain law and order, it's not accurate. It is not accurate. And we are not yet living in a police state, and I trust that we will not get there. But I am also saying that even if the protesters made a conscious effort to engage in an act of civil disobedience, we have long heralded that value of civil disobedience as a progressive step in a progressive democracy. And so there was no threat to life and limb. That civil disobedience, that act was carried out in a peaceful way if they felt that the crowds were, too bundled up in one way or the other, where they needed to have safe distances between themselves, then that could have been engineered. That could have been accommodated.
Okay.
Right? There was no act of criminal activity where there was a threat to other individuals and to property. That did not happen, Darren, at all.
Well,
what we saw was a peaceful picket, right, of persons shouting their various positions on this extremely complex.
You know the counter to that argument. There could have been individuals at that protest who had COVID or have COVID-19, maybe asymptomatic, and be spreading it because a lot of those individuals and protesters were not wearing masks, and it could have been a super spreader event, as you just mentioned. That could be the counter, and there is where the public harm could come. I'm just saying that I'm pretty sure you're going to hear that counter argument.
I agree with you.
Okay.
I can make that argument myself. In fact, I am making that argument.
Right.
That's because there is this movement by people to have this public show that we ought to organize that properly.
Understood.
So that it is not a threat to them and to the rest of us. But I will not accept that type of brutal and oppressive crackdown on a section of the people of this country was warranted. And I also just want to state that I think that it is the culmination of the type of loose language that we have heard being used against unvaccinated persons in this country. There has been a level of spiteful and malevolency in talking about persons who are contrary, who are vaccine hesitant.
I want to press you on that.
When you build up that type of animus in a society, and you give the impression that it is us against them, and they are a threat, and they are the cause, of you not making money, of people dying in the hospitals, then what do we expect?
Your point is made. We're almost out of time, believe it or not. I do want to press you on that. What do you think the government needs to do to address this issue of vaccine hesitancy? There are some people who are never going to take the vaccine. My Rastafarian brothers and sisters, they're not going to take it for religious reasons, enough respect to them. There are others who are just anti-vaxxers, but there are those who remain. Yeah, well, the Rastafarians, enough respect to them in the sense that I respect their position. That's their position. That's their position. We live in a democracy. But my question to you is, what do you think the government needs to do to address the vaccine hesitant? Those who are just fearful that this vaccine may not be safe, they may have side effects that they may never see the back of, etc., etc. There's an issue of hesitancy. Where do you think the government needs to change its approach, is my question to you.
Yes, we have said a number of things on this issue. Number one, it is clear that the government does not have an effective communication strategy. In fact, I do not know that there is a communication strategy at all. And so immediately one needs to be devised. And that communication strategy has to be multivariate and multi-leveled. It has to have a community effort in terms of the message percolating to various segments of the communities, not just on a national level, because I think that is where the discussions have been happening. Okay. That's one. Then we have spoken about the fact that needs to be sustained and it needs to be three-dimensional. And so it needs to also be engaging so that people have the opportunity to speak directly to the policymakers or to the management, the COVID management team, or whatever type of institutional framework that will eventually be put in. Because to this day, that has not been done. So we have also asked for there to be a quasi management COVID team that is not filled with our politicians and certainly not led by the Minister of Health. We have asked for that. And it's not a case of just putting a group of people together and having a press conference once in a while when there's a COVID spike. But those engagements must be sustained. We have asked for the discussions around COVID to be extremely data-driven and scientific in the way that it is done. Additionally, one of the very first things that the government can do is to begin to respectfully engage the various interest groups and stakeholders. We know that the unions have been knocking on the door of the cabinet for quite some time, and that door needs to be opened respectfully, and those engagements need to be had respectfully. Meanwhile, coming out of a press conference by the trade union, the government went and unilaterally gazetted the latest updates to the Public Health Act. And these things do injury to the process, right? To build a level of, to consolidate that nationalism that needs to be built around the COVID issue.
All right.
That is not being done.
I cannot have a dance with you on radio and not ask a political question. And my only political questions to you, because our time is fast spent, is: are you going to be a candidate for the Democratic National Alliance in the next general elections? And if so, which constituency?
Wow, Darren, you are such a forthright man.
I am. I am.
Well,
Sometimes.
All things are being considered.
When time is of essence, I have to be direct.
Let me say, that is a great possibility.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I will leave it there.
Okay. It's a great possibility. And
it's a great possibility. We have stated publicly that the DNA has its own internal process of candidate selection.
Okay.
And so I will not be so bold-faced as to make that declaration. Okay. I will subject myself to the process, and the public will know in due time.
All right. You're being a team player, even though you're the chairperson of the party. Excellent response. Thank you very much, Malaka Parker. Always great.
Thank you, Darren.
All right. All the best to you.